Your jaw is weak, and I'm here to tell you why. Even if you chewed through a pack of gum a day, or chewed on the toughest steaks and the toughest vegetables, it doesn't matter. It's still going to be weak. And it's because of its lever mechanics. This video is made up of 3 parts. Firstly, I'm going to break down the 3 kinds of levers. Secondly, I'm going to explain what kind of a lever the jaw is. And thirdly, I'm going to explain why it's not the most efficient lever available and why animals don't have the most efficient lever available for a jaw. It's going to be Jansel. Exactly. Welcome to the Skullywag Lab. I'm Dr. Rex. Today, we're talking about levers. Specifically, we're going to be talking about what kind of a lever the jaw is, and why it is that kind of lever. Let's get into it. Alright, firstly, let's break down the key components of a lever system. We have the joint, or the fulcrum, and this is where the rotation of the lever takes place. Next we have the in lever, also known as the effort arm, and this is the arm of the lever where an input force is applied to rotate the joint of the lever. Next we have the out lever, or load arm. This is where the force is transmitted to shift the load with the input force. Next we have the load, and this represents the force of the system that runs counter to the input force. This is the actual thing that we're trying to move with the lever. And finally we have the effort, or the input force being applied. There's 3 main configurations of these lever parts. These configurations represent the 3 main types of levers. A type 1 lever is the most easily recognizable of all levers. This has the joint in the middle with the effort and load on either side. An example of this is scissors. Others include seesaws and crowbars. A type 2 lever has the joint at one end with the load sitting between the joint and the effort. An example of this is a nutcracker. Others include wheelbarrows and those little handheld juicers that bartenders use. A type 3 lever again has the joint at one end, but this time the load is on the other end with the effort being applied between the joint and the load. An example of this is the trusty barbecue tongs. Others include shovels, brooms and tweezers. So which one of these levers represents the jaw? Well, if we were to set up these different parts of the jaw in a similar way to these previous examples, it'd basically look like an upside down version of a type 3 lever, with the joint at one end, the input force in the middle, and the load at the opposite end. The joint is the jaw joint, the effort is made from the jaw muscles, and the in lever being the average distance between the jaw joint and the muscle fibers. The out lever is the distance between the biting tooth and the jaw joint, and the load is both the weight of the mandible and also the resistance of the food or other object being bitten into. Looking at this on an actual skull, sure, it's a little bit more complicated, but the joint is still at the back, the load is still at the front, and the effort is right there in between. Oh yeah, classic type 3 lever right there. Now all 3 of these levers can be found inside the body at different places. The most obvious type 1 lever happens at the base of the skull. Just a simple nod moves the head backwards and forwards about a central pivoting point, which is the atlas on top of the spine. The best example of a type 2 lever is in the ankle, where you've got the pivoting point at the ball of the foot, you've got the Achilles tendon pulling as the effort, and in the middle you've got the weight of the body being supported by the shin bones. The type 3 lever is common across the body. You can see this in your arm joints, in your finger joints, and the jaw is another good example. But there's something interesting about all these different kinds of levers. Did you notice how most type 2 levers involve the need to generate higher forces than what you can normally do with a squeeze, so for like nutcrackers and juices? Well, that's because the type 2 lever is the most efficient kind of lever. Alright, let's take a look at me lifting some weights at the gym. Now, I'm no gym junkie by any means, and you can see this with me struggling to curl this 35 kilogram or roughly 75 pound bar. At the start of my session, I could probably handle something way bigger, I don't know, 70, 80, maybe 100 kilos.
Lazy.
I swear! Anyway, none of this matters, because look at how easily my little chicken legs can lift 145 kilograms, or around 320 pounds. Well, a lot of this is to do with the efficiency of the lever. Let's break this down. A perfectly equal lever would have the in lever and out lever arms at the exact same length. This means that the amount of force required to lift the load is equal to the resisting force of the weight of the load. However, if we decrease the length of the in lever and increase the length of the out lever, this means we have to apply more force to the lever to shift the load. This would be a less efficient lever. Going the other way, if we increase the length of the in lever and decrease the length of the out lever, we can more easily shift the load. This is a more efficient system. Now, because the Type 2 lever has the load in the middle, and the in lever is therefore always longer than the out lever, this makes it a more efficient lever than the Type 3 lever. This explains why my calf muscles can lift so much more weight than my biceps, for the most part. Okay, looking at this long-nosed Potteroo skull above and this Rufous Bettong skull below, we can see that the shorter face species has a more efficient lever system for biting with the front teeth. And this makes sense because the shorter face Rufous Bettong bites into harder foods than the long-nosed Potteroo, which specializes in soft underground fungi. So at this point, you might be asking yourself the main question of this video. If a Type 2 lever is more efficient, why don't animals have a jaw that's a Type 2 lever? Wouldn't it be better to just have this crazy nutcracker jaw with muscles at the front of the teeth that could crush anything? Well, there's a few reasons why the jaw is the way the jaw is. Firstly, the front teeth can be used for many different tasks other than just biting foods. This might include capturing food in the first place, which means the teeth would have to be further forward on the face, as well as for holding objects, grooming, and threat displays, or even attack and defense. These other tasks are performed much better with the teeth in front of the muscles. Secondly, we humans might not need our front teeth to capture food, mostly, or groom ourselves, mostly, or in threat displays. I give up. Anyway, the point is that the anatomy of our skulls today comes from our ancestors that had their front teeth positioned in front of their jaw muscles so that they could do some or possibly even all of these things at some point. Evolution can only work with what it already has. It can't just invent some new crazy anatomy out of nowhere. Also, the further back in the jaw you go, the more efficient the bite is because the biting tooth is closer to the jaw joint. So if you think about it, this decreases the out lever. So some teeth can and do fall behind much of the muscle force. This means that many animals can use their premolars and molars to do the crushing with more force, while still having their front teeth to do all these other things. But there's also a risk involved in having a Type 2 lever jaw, and that's the risk of it becoming a Type 1 lever jaw. Let me explain. Let's say we have a Type 2 lever jaw with more muscles towards the front and the biting tooth behind them. As the force increases to try to crush the food item, this starts to pull apart the jaw joint. If the food item is particularly hard and the force to crack it is higher than the integrity of the jaw joint, this can turn the food item into the fulcrum and pull the joint apart as a Type 1 lever. Now, we do see some examples of where a Type 2 lever might work, but these are typically rare. For example, Philip Cox here showed that the South African spring hare probably has a Type 2 lever along much of its jaw because of the highly modified muscles on its face. But this species is also related to rodents and therefore has the similar chisel-like front teeth that other rodents have. So this means a lot of its food is pre-processed by its incisors. So the likelihood of tough, bulky items making it to the molars is quite low, and instead this higher efficiency would be used to just further break down foods that have been sliced up by the front teeth beforehand. Another way around this threat of injury to the jaw joint can be seen in some carnivores. Now, by carnivores, I don't necessarily mean meat-eating animals, but I mean members of the carnivora, which include cats, dogs, bears, weasels, mongooses, hyenas, and even skunks. A lot of carnivores have a relatively simple system of biting because they mostly just slice through meat and skin. Since many of them don't need to grind their food up, they don't really need to have a very mobile jaw joint. So some carnivores have reinforced their jaw joint by having this hinge-style joint where the jaw condyle sits within the curved space of the skull. Let's look at this on a wolverine skull. No, not that kind of wolverine, okay? This kind of wolverine. We can see that this section of the joint, called the postglenoid process, has curved around to sit below the condyle of the jaw. This means that when the wolverine bites hard with its back teeth onto more resistant food items, like a bone for example, then the bone is less likely to become a point of rotation and cause injury to the jaw joint. So nature does have an interesting way of finding solutions to many problems.
In summary, the jaw usually has a less efficient kind of lever system going on because the jaw does a lot of other things besides just crushing foods, and also because it limits the risk of injury to the jaw joints. However, we need to keep in mind that chewing on foods is a super dynamic and chaotic activity. You probably don't even realize how many micro adjustments are going on every time you're chewing on something and moving things around. You're constantly flexing different muscles and chewing on the food in different places. It's craziness in there. The fact that most animals don't have a jaw joint like the wolverines means that there's always a little bit of a chance that you might get an injury to the jaw joint, especially when you're trying to bite down on foods with the teeth at the very back of the jaw. In the next video on jaw function, I'm going to be breaking down why bites with the back teeth might not be as hard as bites with teeth a little bit further forward. If you've enjoyed the content of this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one.